Nyara sat on the smooth, sun-warmed stones outside the family hut, weaving a small mat from reeds, though her thoughts were far from the present. The sky shimmered with the heat of the dry season, and the wind whispered through the baobab branches overhead. Her hands moved, but her mind was on the past, on her mother's voice, on the stories she used to tell while sewing late into the night. Her mother had been known for her craft. No one in the village could sew like her. People came from neighboring clans just to commission her ceremonial robes and healing cloths. But it was the wedding dress she made for Nyara years before her passing that had always held the most wonder. It was stitched with sacred threads her mother claimed were blessed by the wind spirits themselves. Pale gold and deep earth red, it shimmered even in darkness and carried the scent of wild hibiscus. "No hand but love shall touch this gown," her mother had said once, her eyes bright with something that almost looked like magic. But that was before her mother fell ill, before the coughing fits, the long nights of moaning and the silence that followed. After the funeral rites, her father remarried quickly. Everyone said he needed help with Nyara and the house, but Nyara felt the loss deepen when her stepmother moved in. Her name was Rena, and though she wore smiles like bracelets, Nyara quickly learned that bitterness lingered beneath them. At first, Rena was indifferent, treating Nyara like a shadow. But when word spread that Kimo, the warrior son of a respected family, had asked for Nyara's hand, something shifted. Nyara saw it in the way Rena stared at her when she thought she wasn't looking, the way she sneered when Kimo's name was mentioned. Rena's jealousy clung to the air like wood smoke. Nyara had waited months for the right moment to retrieve her mother's dress. It had been hidden safely in a carved chest in the corner of the family hut, sealed with cloth and a charm of river stones. But the day she opened the chest, her breath caught in her throat. The dress was gone. She ran to Rena, heart pounding, but the woman only laughed. "You left it too long, girl," she said. "Servants told me it was stolen. What kind of bride are you with your head in the clouds?" Nyara's hands trembled as she tried to make sense of it. Who would steal such a thing? The charm hadn't been disturbed. Only someone from within could have taken it. Rena's words felt like poison, sweetly delivered but laced with something cruel. That night, Nyara dreamed of her mother. She stood on a cliff above the village, her dress flowing like river water, her eyes hollow and weeping. "She lies," her mother whispered, pointing toward the fire. "She lies with ash in her mouth." Nyara woke with tears on her cheeks and the scent of burned cloth in her nostrils. The next day she searched every corner of the compound. She asked the house servants, who lowered their eyes and said nothing. She questioned her father, who only shook his head and muttered that grief had made her see things that weren't there. But something in Nyara refused to give up. The dress was not just a piece of cloth, it was a promise. Her mother had sewn her love and protection into every stitch. It was meant to guard her on her wedding day, to remind her that even in absence, her mother stood with her. Days passed. Kimo came to visit, his presence like a balm, steady and true. He promised to marry her with or without the dress, and Nyara smiled, but it was a cracked thing. Inside, something still mourned. Then one late afternoon, when the sun hung low and gold in the sky, Nyara saw something strange. From behind the hut, faint wisps of black smoke curled into the air. She followed it, her sandals crunching on dry leaves, until she came to the fire pit. Rena stood there, staring into the coals, her arms crossed tightly. Nyara stepped forward, heart thudding. "What are you burning?" she asked softly. Rena turned slowly, eyes cold. "Old cloth," she said. "Rags. Things that no longer matter." But Nyara's eyes locked on a patch of gold thread curled in the ash, refusing to vanish. Her knees weakened. She stepped closer, reaching out, and the wind stirred, lifting the ashes into the air. They danced for a moment, and then settled in a strange spiral on the ground. "You burned it," Nyara whispered. "You burned her gift to me." Rena's lips twitched. "You don't need dead women's cloth to marry. You'll have something new." But Nyara turned and ran. She didn't know where her feet were taking her, only that her soul screamed with betrayal. She ran past the market stalls, past the elder's grove, until she reached the old fig tree where her mother used to sit and sew. There she collapsed. The wind began to rise around her, curling through the branches, lifting her braids. The sky darkened slightly, though no clouds moved in. A voice, soft but firm, echoed in her ears. "All is not lost, child." She opened her eyes. The ashes that had clung to her skin began to shimmer. They slid down her arms, her legs, gathering at her feet. Slowly they began to rise, spinning in a tight circle, lifting like a dust devil but black and golden. Nyara gasped. The ashes began to shape themselves, first into sleeves then into flowing skirts. Threads of light glowed between them, drawing lines like stitches. Within moments, a gown formed around her, ethereal and yet solid, glowing faintly like moonlit water. She could feel warmth in it, her mother's warmth. The wind howled once, loud and fierce, sweeping across the village and shaking the huts. People looked up from their tasks, startled. At Rena's compound, a strong gust slammed into the walls, knocking a water jar to the ground. Back under the fig tree Nyara stood. The ash dress clung to her as if sewn by invisible hands. It shimmered without catching dust, moving with the grace of a whisper. When she stepped forward, the ground beneath her glowed faintly. She returned to the village slowly, calmly. Her head was high, her steps firm. Whispers followed her, some gasped, some crossed themselves in reverence. At the center of the village, Kimo stood waiting. His eyes widened as he saw her, but he didn't speak. Instead, he stepped aside and let her walk past him, her figure wrapped in wind and memory. Later, elders would say that the spirits had clothed her. Some believed the dress had been waiting all along, hidden in the air, needing only truth to shape it. Rena refused to speak of it again, retreating deeper into bitterness. Nyara, however, carried the wind-stitched gown with her heart full. Her mother's love had not burned, it had risen. That night, the wind howled like it had lost something precious. The trees around the compound groaned, their branches creaking like old bones. Nyara couldn't sleep. Her dreams had been thick with the scent of smoke and the echo of her mother's voice crying her name. She tossed in her mat, sweat beading her brow despite the chill. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. She rose from her bed and wrapped herself in her mother's old shawl, the one she had kept hidden in her woven basket since the day her father remarried. It smelled faintly of dried hibiscus and something older, something like memory. She stepped out into the courtyard. The moon was veiled, a ghost drifting through the clouds, and the night was darker than usual. A strange light flickered from the side of the compound, soft, amber, and moving. Nyara's feet moved before her mind caught up. Her heart beat louder than her footsteps as she crept past the storehouse, past the grinding stone, and toward the banana grove at the edge of the fence. That's when she saw her. Her stepmother knelt before a crackling fire. In her hands she held something white, long, flowing, delicate. The wedding dress. The sacred one. The one stitched by Nyara's mother with threads whispered over by the old women of the river clan. The one said to be blessed by the spirits of womanhood. Her heart leapt to her throat. No, she cried, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife through silk. The stepmother's head snapped toward her, eyes wide in panic, but she did not stop. She shoved the gown deeper into the flames. The fire surged unnaturally high, as if hungry for more than cloth, licking the sky with yellow fingers. The edges of the gown curled and blackened instantly. Silk turned to shadow. Thread to smoke. Nyara lunged forward, but it was too late. The dress was consumed. Nothing but ash danced in the air, swirling in ghostly spirals. Why? Nyara screamed. Her knees hit the earth, and her hands plunged into the dying fire's edge. The embers hissed but did not burn. Her fingers closed around something soft, not cloth but ash. Yet it did not fall apart. It clung to her palms like threads spun from mourning. Her stepmother backed away, her face white with shock. It was cursed, she muttered. You don't understand. It was cursed. No girl should wear a dead woman's promise. You lied. Nyara spat, her voice cracking. You locked it away. You said it was stolen. You let me mourn it, dream of it, beg the ancestors for it. The wind picked up, spiraling around them. The fire had died, but the ashes lifted into the air, not falling, not scattering. They formed patterns, twisting symbols, dancing loops. They hovered above Nyara's hands like threads waiting to be woven. She felt it, like a pulse. The ashes weren't dead. They were remembering. Her stepmother turned and ran, her feet crashing through underbrush, but Nyara remained kneeling, hands open. The ash began to wrap around her fingers, winding up her arms. It was cool, not like dust but like river silk. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, low, warm, and ancient. No fire can burn what love has made. Tears ran down her cheeks as the ashes swirled around her body. Piece by piece they spun into a gown. Not white, but silver-gray, shimmering under the moonlight. The fabric rippled like it was alive. It fit her perfectly, as if her mother had sewn it around her very soul. And when the wind tried to touch it, it slipped right past. The gown stood firm, untouched, unstirred, like the mountain roots beneath the earth. The ash had remembered what the flames tried to erase. She rose, slow and solemn, the gown trailing behind her like a shadow of starlight. She walked back into the village. No one dared stop her. Her stepmother's hut was dark. Nyara stood before it and without knocking spoke one word. Truth. The wind howled through the village. Every hut creaked. Every tree bent low. From behind doors, people peered out and gasped when they saw her, the girl in the gown of ash, glowing like moonlight wrapped in sorrow. Some whispered that she was a spirit. Others fell to their knees. But Nyara did not speak again. The warrior she was promised to arrived at sunrise. He found her sitting in the courtyard, her face calm, her hands folded on her lap, and her ash gown unshaken by the morning breeze. He dropped to one knee and looked at her with wonder. I've searched for you, he said. The spirits told me you had something sacred to show me. Nyara lifted her hands. Ash fell from her palms, shaping the air, forming symbols of union and rebirth. He understood without explanation. The wedding took place not in a hut, but beneath the open sky. The elders came. Even the village seer, half blind and bent with age, wept when she saw the gown. It's the storm's sorrow made whole, she whispered. And the fire's guilt made grace. From that day on, no one burned sacred cloth again. Girls were taught to guard the story stitched into their garments. And whenever ash floated on the wind in the village of Nyara, people paused and remembered that even destruction can give birth to memory, if the love behind it was true. Nyara never spoke of that night again. She didn't need to. Her gown said everything, that some things though burned will never be broken. As Nyara ran into the hills with her fists still clutching the ashes, the night air turned strange around her. The sky was heavy with clouds but no rain came. Instead, the wind stirred with an urgency that felt alive, circling her, weaving through her hair, and brushing her cheeks like a familiar hand. She didn't stop running until the village lights disappeared behind her and the silence of the hills took her in. Breathing hard, she collapsed by a large flat rock where she and her mother once sat to watch the sun dip beneath the world. The ashes in her palms still shimmered faintly, like they remembered the fire they had come from. She stared at them, half hoping the gown would reform, that time would rewind, but the black dust only stuck to her skin, refusing to fall. And then the wind shifted. It moved in a spiral, slow and deliberate, curling around her like a protective arm. Nyara looked up, heart pounding as the breeze turned warm against her face. It was not a wind she knew, it did not belong to this world alone. A whisper floated to her ears. My child. The voice was soft, barely louder than the wind in the grass, but it struck deep. Nyara sat upright. Mother? Again the wind swirled, pulling gently at her braids, lifting her chin with invisible hands. The voice returned, fuller now and unmistakable. The dress was never just thread and cloth, Nyara. Carries more than what eyes can see. Remembers. It listens. Tears welled in her eyes. She burned it, Mama. She destroyed what you left for me. She only freed it, the voice replied gently. Flame cannot destroy a blessing sown with love and blood. She changed its shape but not its spirit. Nyara trembled. The ashes stirred in her palms as if breathing. Around her, the wind hummed, not a song, not quite, but something ancient and calming. The sound wrapped itself around her heart like lullabies once did. I don't understand, Nyara whispered. You don't need to, the voice answered. But you must trust. Let the wind carry you. Nyara held the ashes to her chest. Her tears dried in the strange warmth. She remembered the stories her mother once told, of women who stitched their love into thread, of winds that remembered the dead, of magic that lived in what was once lost. The wind began to rise again, circling her faster, then slowing, then brushing still. It no longer whispered, but its presence lingered, watchful, guiding. When Nyara stood again she felt taller. Not in body but in purpose. The ashes had fused to her skin in delicate patterns, lace-like spirals on her arms, across her collarbones and over her heart. The wind had not taken the dress. It had begun to rebuild it. Nyara sat on the hilltop long after the last winds had faded, her hands cupped tightly around the small bundle of ashes. Her breath came in slow, shallow waves as though afraid to disturb what remained. Then something caught her eye, something that glinted with a light not of fire or moon but of memory. Nestled among the charred remnants was a single thread. It shimmered like molten silver, coiling delicately through the soot as though untouched by flame. Her heart skipped. With trembling fingers she reached in and lifted it. The moment her skin met the thread, warmth surged through her arms, not painful but deeply electric, like recognition. It was not just thread. It was alive with something old, something sacred. Her palms began to shimmer faintly, pulsing with soft silver light, as if echoing the thread's magic. The ash around her lifted gently into the air, spinning like mist caught in a breath of wind. Shapes emerged, shadows of patterns, swirls like embroidery floating in the night. The thread tugged between her fingers, pulling itself into loops and spirals. Nyara gasped. It was drawing the dress. Not on cloth. Not on earth. But in the very air around her. Each time she moved the thread, the shimmer followed, obeying her instincts as if her hands remembered what her mind did not. Her mother's stitching. The sacred weaves. Her fingers moved in rhythms she had never been taught but somehow knew, like the lullabies sung into her bones, or the way her feet danced alone in childhood without ever learning the steps. The air thickened with the design. A bodice appeared in mist, embroidered with stars. Sleeves floated into form, delicate and light, as if woven from breath. A long skirt unfurled from the night sky itself, ash swirling down to settle into invisible seams. The silver thread stitched it all together, glowing brighter with each pass through the empty air. And all the while the wind held its breath. She felt tears fall silently down her cheeks. They sparkled as they struck the pattern, becoming pearls that nestled into the folds of the skirt. Her sorrow did not stain the work, it became part of it. Every drop of pain turned to beauty. Every loss became design. When the final stitch looped and pulled through the unseen hem, Nyara's hands fell still. The floating dress hung suspended before her, real yet not. It did not touch the ground. The wind circled it in reverence, never daring to touch the ash-threaded fabric. A gown not made of silk or cotton, but of memory, magic and mourning. And in its silence, it spoke of love that survived the flames. Nyara sank to her knees, clutching the silver thread close. It was no longer a simple relic. It was a promise unbroken. A piece of her mother that refused to burn. A defiance woven into the night. The thread pulsed once more in her hand, then stilled. But its light lingered in the space around her, gently breathing with every beat of her heart. She rose slowly and the gown rose with her. It hovered just behind her like a spirit waiting to be worn. Not yet. But soon. And the wind whispered, "She is readying you. The thread cannot burn. And neither can you." Nyara's hands trembled as she crouched beneath the sheltering arms of the old baobab tree. Its bark was rough and scarred, a silent witness to many seasons, and now, it enfolded her in its gnarled embrace as if it too remembered her mother. The hollow within its trunk was just large enough for her to sit curled, the earth beneath softened by years of fallen leaves and stories long forgotten. Outside, the wind moaned through the trees, not mournful but urging, like a lullaby whispered between generations. The glowing silver thread she had found among the ashes of her mother's wedding dress pulsed gently in her hands. It was warm, almost alive, as if it carried a heartbeat. And the ash, it wasn't ordinary. It clung to her fingers like silk dust, shimmering faintly under the moonlight. She had no needle. Yet, when she looped the thread through the ash, it responded, not with the resistance of the dead, but with the grace of something waking. Her fingers moved instinctively, pulling memory into form, breath into stillness. The first stitch sang, a soft, high note like the chime of a distant bell. The wind swirled tighter around the hollow, protecting her from the cold. With each pull of the thread, a faint shimmer stitched itself into the air. The ash, guided by her hands, began to gather like mist drawn into shape. And as it formed, memories spilled into her, the weight of her mother's arms, the echo of lullabies, the feel of warm hands braiding her hair. She didn't know how long she worked. Time bent in that space. Her fingers bled but didn't stop. Her back ached, but the wind whispered strength into her bones. She stitched through the dark hours, guided by the pulse of the thread and the shape of the memories weaving themselves into fabric. The baobab's hollow became a sanctuary. Glowing fireflies gathered in the branches above, their soft lights illuminating her work. Owls watched from the shadows, silent witnesses. Even the crickets seemed to hush their song as if afraid to break the spell. Her first creation was no longer just cloth, it was a sleeve, long and flowing, humming with light. It bore no color she could name, shifting between silver, shadow, and the pale lavender of twilight. She pressed it to her cheek and felt warmth radiating from it, like a breath or a blessing. With each piece she completed, a memory surfaced, not just her own but her mother's too. She saw her mother on her wedding day laughing in the sun. She saw her stitching the sacred threads late at night, whispering ancient names with each knot. She felt the joy in her mother's chest when she embroidered stars into the neckline, believing one day Nyara would wear it. Tears streamed down Nyara's face, falling soundlessly into the ashes. She wasn't just remaking the dress. She was remembering a life, rebuilding a lineage of love, pain, strength, and sacrifice. Every thread she pulled was an act of resurrection. But it wasn't easy. There were moments the ash fought her. It would scatter, rise into the air, or dissolve in her fingers. In those moments, doubt crawled in. Was she worthy to wear this again? Would the dress truly return? Would her mother's spirit forgive her for failing to protect it? Then the wind would return, curling around her wrists, and in her mother's voice it would say, asterisk, the thread remembers what fire forgets. Asterisk. With that, her fingers would resume their rhythm, and the ash would settle, pliant and luminous. Stitch by stitch, sleeve by sleeve, Nyara rebuilt what was taken. No longer the exact same dress but something more. A garment born not just of tradition but transformation. Not simply a wedding dress but an heirloom of power. As dawn bled slowly into the horizon, the first golden light filtered through the cracks in the tree. Nyara leaned back, eyes stinging with exhaustion, hands blistered and raw. In her lap lay most of the dress, still incomplete but undeniably alive. It shimmered with a soft pulse like breath, as if waiting for the final threads to wake. She knew then that she couldn't finish it here. The tree had given her shelter, but the final stitches would need a different kind of ground. A place sacred not just to her mother, but to the spirits that had always watched from the hills. The dress needed to be completed where truth had once been buried, and now must rise. Nyara folded the fabric carefully, wrapping it in bark and vine. The glowing thread curled around her wrist like a promise. Her body ached, but inside her, something had shifted. She was no longer the girl who had cried as her mother's gift burned. She was the girl who now stitched from ashes. And the wind, soft and proud, whispered her name again, Nyara. The final dress is unlike any ever seen, light as air, darker than coal, yet glowing from within. When the stepmother tries to tear it away, the wind pushes her back. The gown clings only to Nyara. In the clearing where the wind had first whispered her name, Nyara stood tall, her body wrapped in the fabric born of memory and ash. The dress shimmered like twilight after a storm, woven not with thread, but with grief, love, and echoes of her mother's laughter. Each fold whispered stories, stories of the girl she had been, and the woman she was becoming. Her stepmother appeared at the edge of the trees, her eyes wild, her hands twisted with rage. "Take that off," she hissed, stepping forward. "It doesn't belong to you." But as her fingers reached for the hem, the air turned sharp. A wind surged from nowhere, lifting leaves, rustling branches, and knocking her back to the earth with a force unseen. She scrambled up, mud streaking her once immaculate dress. "You wretched child," she spat. "You burned it. You burned the one thing that made you special." Nyara didn't flinch. She looked down at her dress, feeling the wind dance around her ankles. "You were wrong," she said calmly. "The dress wasn't what made me special. It was the story behind it. The hands that sewed it. The heart that loved me enough to pass it down." The stepmother lunged again, and this time the gown itself responded. It shimmered, then stiffened like armor. The hem rose like mist and wrapped around Nyara's arms, protecting her. The wind circled tighter, no longer gentle but fierce, a guardian called by grief, by injustice, by memory. "Why won't it come off?" the stepmother shrieked, clawing at the edges. But the fabric refused her touch. Her hands passed through it like smoke. "Because it knows you," Nyara said, voice quiet but unshakable. "And it remembers what you did." The stepmother staggered back, breath coming in short, broken gasps. "That thing, it's cursed." "No," said Nyara. "It's mine." The wind responded to her words like a drumbeat. The trees bent slightly inward as if bowing to her courage. The sky above rippled with clouds that glowed faintly with the memory of fire. It wasn't rage that filled the clearing, it was truth. And truth had weight. She stepped forward, each movement graceful, each gesture royal without need for crown or jewels. With the wind in her hair and the shimmer of the gown pulsing around her, Nyara walked past the stepmother without fear. And with every step she took, the forest seemed to open to her, as if the land itself had been waiting for this moment. Back in the village, stories had already begun to spread. They said they saw her dancing with ashes that glowed. They said the wind followed her like a pet. They whispered that her dress hummed with the voices of the dead and the forgotten. But none dared speak ill of her again. Nyara returned not to beg but to build. She didn't seek revenge, only restoration. Where cruelty had flourished, she sowed seeds of memory and compassion. And as she walked through the streets, her gown trailing behind her like living shadow, the people lowered their heads, not in fear but in awe. Some tried to speak to her. Others could only watch. But all felt the same thing, that they were witnessing not a girl reborn but something older. Something sacred. In the months that followed, the village changed. The market that had once turned her away now left fruits and cloth at her door. Children who had mocked her came bringing flowers they'd picked with trembling hands. And no one dared speak the stepmother's name. For the woman who had burned the first dress vanished not long after that day in the forest. Some say the wind carried her away. Others claim she wanders still, seeking the thread she could never hold. As for Nyara, she kept the new gown hidden except on nights when the wind was high and the moon was bold. On those nights she would walk the fields, her dress flickering in and out of view like a ghost stitched from dusk. And those who saw her swore the wind whispered their names, not in warning but in remembrance. Because that was the power of the gown. It didn't bow to beauty nor to cruelty. It bowed only to truth. And truth, once woven into fabric and stitched by a grieving daughter's hand, could never be undone. The wind carried the scent of wild jasmine as the warrior stood before the village, his armor glinting softly beneath the morning sun. But it wasn't the metal that caught eyes, it was his stillness, the way he bowed his head with reverence as Nyara stepped into view. The ash gown floated an inch above the earth, trailing embers that never fell. A hush rippled through the gathering. Even the birds, once chirping from the trees, seemed to pause. Nyara walked with quiet strength, her fingers brushing the soft air where the silver thread still shimmered faintly. She could feel her mother's presence, not behind her but within her. With every breath she took, the dress responded, pulsing with warmth. When she reached the center of the circle where the wedding rites were to be performed, the warrior did not wait for the village elder to speak. He stepped forward, dropped to one knee and looked up at Nyara, not like a man claiming a wife but like one meeting a miracle. "I see her," he said loud enough for all to hear. "I see the woman who once healed the sick with leaves from her garden. I see the one who sang to the winds and the rains listened. I see your mother in your eyes." A murmur moved through the crowd. Whispers curled like smoke from every direction. Even the elder's staff trembled slightly as it touched the earth. Nyara did not answer, not yet. Her gaze met his, steady, curious, unsure. This was not the man her stepmother had intended her to marry. That man had vanished days before, driven away in fear when the ashes began dancing in the night. But this warrior had come uninvited, riding a horse with no saddle and carrying a blade bound in vines. Some said he was a prince in exile. Others said he had no name. But Nyara had seen him once, years ago, standing beside her mother when the floods came. He had been younger then, quieter, listening. "I do not come to own you," he said, standing now. "I come to stand beside you, to protect your story, to learn from it, to be part of it only if I am welcome." The elder turned to Nyara as tradition required. "Will you answer?" he asked softly. Nyara did not speak with her mouth. Instead, she lifted the edge of her dress and let the fabric fall like rain onto the warrior's hand. The ash glowed where it touched him, tracing tiny veins of silver into his skin. His eyes widened, not in fear but in awe. "The spirit has chosen," the elder murmured. Nyara's voice finally rose, not like thunder but like a long-awaited breeze after drought. "If you vow not to silence the wind in me, nor cover the flame that made me, then I say yes." The warrior dropped to both knees now. "I vow." The dress shimmered once, briefly blinding. The wind spun around them in a slow spiral, lifting dust, petals and voices into the air. The crowd gasped as the wind tugged at cloaks and scarves, not with violence but insistence. It moved through every villager, brushing cheeks, curling hair, pressing into chests as though to say, "Remember this." Nyara's stepmother, standing at the edge of the crowd, tried once again to shout, but the wind caught her voice and tore it like old cloth. Her mouth opened wide, but only a faint wheeze escaped. The moment she tried to step closer, the gown flared in warning. She stumbled back, tripping over roots that weren't there a second before. A child laughed nearby, but the sound faded quickly into stillness. Nyara placed her hand on the warrior's shoulder. He rose slowly, his hand still glowing faintly where the thread had touched him. The elder began to chant the old words, words not used since the time of river queens and mountain brides. Words that once bound spirits and flesh in unity. When the chant ended, Nyara and the warrior turned to face the people. But the people did not cheer. They knelt. One by one they bent their knees not to royalty but to truth. To what could not be burned, could not be silenced, could not be stolen. The warrior looked down at Nyara and said, "Let the world try to name you. I know who you are." Nyara smiled. The first real smile she had worn in years. "I am her daughter," she said, voice bright and unshaking. "And I carry her wind." The wind rose then, playful, wild, lifting the corners of the dress, scattering petals into the sky. In that moment the village saw not just a bride but a becoming. A story resticked line by line from pain into power. And the vow held, not just in the words, but in the silence that followed as even the hills leaned in to listen. As the drums rolled across the village like distant thunder, Nyara stepped forward, ash gown whispering secrets with every motion. The ceremonial flame stood at the altar, still and unlit, awaiting her touch. The village gathered in breathless silence, their eyes fixed on the girl they had once ignored, dismissed, pitied. But now, cloaked in a gown of soot and spirit, she held their gaze like a queen. The gown shimmered as she moved, catching light that wasn't there. Her fingers trembled only slightly as she reached toward the flame. Behind her, the wind rose, carrying the scent of old smoke and the soft hum of the thread she had found among the ashes. It wrapped around her fingers like reassurance. Just as she leaned in to light the flame, a loud cry broke the silence. "Stop her!" It was the stepmother. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The woman pushed past villagers, her eyes wild. "She's a witch. This is blasphemy," she screeched. "She wears a curse." But the moment her foot crossed the altar boundary, the air changed. A sudden gust blew, circling Nyara like a cyclone. The ashes woven into her dress began to shimmer violently, lifting from the fabric like fireflies taking flight. They circled the stepmother faster and faster, wrapping her in a whirlwind of glowing dust. The stepmother screamed, clawing at the air. "No. I burned you. I burned you. You cannot return." The ashes responded, not with fire but with memory. The air grew thick with vision. Before the gathered crowd, images formed in ash and light. A young woman, Nyara's mother, stitching at night under the moon's watchful eye. The stepmother, eyes shadowed with envy, watching from the doorway. A fire lit in secret, a woman locked inside, her cries muffled beneath song and drum. The villagers gasped. Some wept. "I only wanted her place," the stepmother sobbed. "I wanted her love, her status, her house. I didn't mean to, I didn't know her spirit would stay." But the ashes did not care for apologies. They surged upward like a cloak and wrapped themselves around the woman. Her scream was swallowed in silence. Then stillness. When the wind fell, the ashes returned to Nyara's gown. The stepmother stood silent, her voice gone, her eyes vacant, as if the memories she buried had returned to live inside her. Elder Dumo stepped forward, hands trembling. "The spirit has spoken," he said, "and justice has dressed itself in ash." Nyara turned to the flame again. This time when she touched it, it lit immediately. Not just the small ceremonial fire, but the hearths around the village, the lamps along the path, even the torches that had long been unlit in the sacred circle. The entire village glowed. And Nyara stood at the center, clothed in her mother's memory, her ancestors' sorrow, and her own hard-earned strength. The warrior, her betrothed, moved to her side. He did not speak. He simply held out his hand. She took it. The crowd parted, not out of fear but reverence. For they had seen what truth looked like when it walked, stitched from ash and lit by wind. And as Nyara took the final step down from the altar, a hush fell again, not silence but awe. The curse was broken. But the memory would remain. And so would the gown. The sky above the village turned a strange silver gray as the last ember of the ceremonial fire dimmed. Nyara stood still, her eyes locked on the figure crouched at her feet, her stepmother trembling and tear-streaked. The village watched in absolute silence, not a child stirred, not even the breeze rustled the leaves of the great fig tree in the square. Everything paused, suspended in the final act of something ancient, something greater than them all. Nyara's ash gown shimmered faintly, pulsing with light like it was breathing. The soft threads that once whispered with her mother's voice now stirred in anticipation. The ashes that made the gown had once been scattered and forgotten, but they had come back. They had been stitched together not by hands but by grief, memory, and the justice that lingers in old bloodlines. Nyara looked down at her stepmother, the woman who had stolen warmth from her childhood, who had tried to bury a spirit too strong to remain silent. "I do not hate you," Nyara said, her voice calm yet echoing through the square. "But you will carry no part of me forward." The wind rose gently, curling around Nyara's figure, lifting the edges of the gown. The fabric responded like it understood her words. The ashes loosened their weave, separating strand by strand, glowing faintly as they lifted into the air. The villagers gasped. What they were witnessing was not destruction but release. The gown began to unravel in midair, not falling but ascending, swirling around Nyara like a cocoon. It floated higher, layer by layer, dissolving like mist touched by the morning sun. As it rose, the ashes shimmered brighter, forming patterns in the sky, swirls, rings, stars. The villagers dropped to their knees as the sky became a painting of dust and light. Some covered their mouths in awe. Others wept. One of the elders whispered, "It's her, the mother." Nyara closed her eyes. She felt it too, the warmth of a hand brushing her shoulder, the scent of her mother's skin, the soft lullaby she hadn't heard in years curling into her ears. The ash had always been her mother's last cry. Now it was her blessing. As the final thread of the gown hovered in the air, it stopped above Nyara. It didn't vanish like the others. Instead, it slowly descended, floating toward her like a feather. It touched her wrist, gently winding around it as if guided by unseen fingers. The villagers leaned forward, stunned. The thread fastened itself softly into a loop, a bracelet woven from ash, moonlight, and memory. Nyara looked at it, and in that moment she knew. This was not just a reminder. It was a promise. The stepmother, still kneeling, covered her face and began to sob. The ground beneath her didn't shake. No fire swallowed her whole. There was no divine punishment. But something greater happened. She was forgotten. From that day on, no one in the village would speak her name again. She would be a shadow without form, a story without a mouth to tell it. Nyara turned away not out of cruelty but out of closure. The villagers opened a path for her. Her groom waited at the edge of the square, his eyes never leaving hers. As she walked toward him, the wind died down. The sky cleared. The ashes that had become stars began to settle in the heavens. One blinked directly above her, a single, constant light. And in the heart of that light was a presence that watched, warmed, and wept softly with pride. From that day, the sky over the village always carried one faint constellation shaped like a gown dancing in the wind. Children would grow up pointing at it, listening to their mother's whisper, "That is the dress made of love and loss." And old women would nod, adding, "It only clung to one girl, because only she remembered how to wear grief with grace." Nyara never removed the ash thread on her wrist. It never aged, never frayed, never faded. Whenever she faced hardship, she would touch it and feel a pulse, a beat that didn't come from her own heart but from another, long gone, still watching. Years later, when her own daughter asked, "Mama, why do the stars shine more when you sing?" Nyara smiled and replied, "Because someone I loved very much is up there, sowing light into the night." And on that land, no one ever burned another's memory again.